Hey guys, this is Delphine with a Japanese lesson on the CultureQuirk channel. Okay, so we've gone over a lot of Japanese grammar so far, but mostly I've talked about particles. Now, I'm not done with particles yet, and they're still very important, but today I wanted to talk about the basics of verbs. This lesson was requested by a few different people actually, so I realized that it definitely needs to be covered. So, the next few lessons are actually going to be a series that'll be going on all through the month of November. Or should I say NOVERBER? That's bad. So by the end of the series, you'll have mastered the basics of Japanese verbs. So let's get right into it. Now for this lesson, I just wanted to go over the differences between formal and plain verbs. Now for just some background information here, in Japanese, there are lots of different levels of formality that are embedded into the language. I personally think it's one of the hardest parts of the language, especially because I'm afraid that if I mess up, I could offend somebody by accident or look like an idiot by being too formal or too informal. It's tough, especially since we don't really have the same thing in English. Sure, there's ways to speak more or less politely in English, but we don't have to conjugate our verbs differently based on how formal we want to be. Now, it's different for other languages. If you're familiar with French or Spanish, I'm sure there are other languages that have this too, you sometimes speak differently to somebody depending on how well you know them. So in French, if you're talking to friends and family, you would address them as tu and use the corresponding verbs with that, and if you're talking to strangers, you would say vous, and then in Spanish, it's tú and usted. If you're familiar with this concept, it might help you, although if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then don't sweat it because Japanese still works very differently. I can make other videos about culture and the social aspects of being formal, but for this lesson, I'm just focusing on the grammatical aspects of formality. So two of the most basic levels of formality you can see in verb conjugation. One of those forms we'll call the plain form, and the other one will be the must form. Plain form is more informal, while the must form is more formal. Now I want to stress that we're looking at the same verbs here. In this situation, there aren't some words that are formal and then other words that are informal. There are both plain and must forms of every verb. So let's start out with the plain form. This is also called the dictionary form. So if you look up a verb in the dictionary, this is the form that it'll be in. These verbs will end with the sound u. So the verbs can end in u, as in au, or to meet, or it can end in ru, as in taberu, or to eat. And they can also end in tsu, mu, nu, bu, ku, gu, and su. So if you see a verb that has one of those u endings, then you're probably looking at the plain form of a verb. Now you can simply refer to one of these verbs as the dictionary form of something and conjugate from there, or you can use them as is in a sentence. For example, mizu wo nomu. I will drink water. Now generally when you use the plain form though, it means that you're talking very casually. So if you're talking to friends or family, or if someone's younger than you or something. Okay, now moving on to the must form. If you've been watching my videos, this is the type of verb that I typically use in my examples. In this form, all of the words end in masu. So using the same words that I just mentioned, aimasu means to meet, tabemasu means to eat, and mizu wo nomimasu still means I will drink water. The difference is just that now you're being a little bit more polite. And the reason that I usually use must form and everything is that I personally think that it's more important to learn the must form first. The reason for that is, for one, must form is just easier to work with. It's easier to make verbs past tense or negative tense with must form than it is with plain form. And the other reason is that if you're not familiar enough with Japanese and don't always know how formal you should be, it's always safer to just use must form instead of trying to be very cool and informal. Japanese people will usually be very understanding if you ever make a mistake, but still, better safe than sorry. And until you get to a point where you're speaking more casually with Japanese people, you're probably gonna at least start out speaking to them more formally, so might as well just know your must forms first. Okay, now that you know the difference between the two forms, how do you change a verb from the plain form to the must form? Well, in order to answer that, I'll need to cover a whole other concept that I think would be a little bit too much for one video, so I'll talk about that next time. Thank you for joining me for this month of NOVERBER. I hope you enjoy it and that it helps you out. And I'll see you next time, guys. Happy learning!